Well, I wasn't going to talk about Israel again after what I said. Was it yesterday or was it the day before? I kind of said my piece about the whole situation with Israel and Palestine and gave my general understanding and view of the conflict, broadly speaking. But I didn't talk a whole lot about this particular specific situation, and mostly because I didn't really care to take much of a side in this current, bout. I sort of tried to contextualize it and talk about how it related and how it really is just sort of the same conflict going back to the days of the Ottoman Empire, where you have conflicts between the Jews who try and evict the Arabs, and the Arabs feel like, hey, we've been here for a long time. Who are you to kick us out, kind of thing. But unfortunately, today things have escalated far beyond that. It's not just a matter anymore. We're far from an argument over 40 people being evicted and kicked out of their houses in some neighborhood in Jerusalem. As of now, over 100 people in Gaza apparently have died. I think like 17 people in Israel have died. And the Israeli government, after Hamas, I guess, floated an offer of a ceasefire, the Israelis turned them down, and they decided to. We're hearing that it's a ground invasion, but I'm mostly, what you're seeing online right now, because this is going on as I record this. We're mostly seeing and hearing the bombs dropping in Gaza. And Gaza is a very densely populated place. If you go and you bomb there, you're going to be killing a lot of people, which is sad. So I don't like to think about that, but I feel compelled to talk about it because there's going to be a lot of people, especially here in the West, who cover for Israel when it comes to this and act like this is okay and this is somehow justified. And I'm in no way here to defend Hamas. I'm not a fan of theirs either. But the Israeli government cannot be surprised. It's not like there was no warning. It's not like Hamas just one day decided, okay, we're going to fire off a bunch of rockets into Israel. Although that's how it's going to be reported, there was a big lead up to this. Anyone who follows the news should know that there was a lot going on. For a week or two before this, you had those protests and riots in Jerusalem, and that was over these families being evicted, and people saying, hey, trying to draw a line in the sand and say, no, so far, no further. We're not going to let you evict these people. And it seems like the big escalation was when they were, the Israeli police cleared out Al-Aqsa, I always have a problem saying that word, Al-Aqsa, I think it is, mosque, which is built on, what the Israelis call the Temple Mount. It's sort of a dual, Jewish and Muslim holy site. The Muslims built their temple on top of where the Jewish temple used to be. From what I understand, it's at that point that Hamas got involved and decided to fire some rockets off into Israel. And in that initial sort of barrage, it seems like only one Israeli was injured. Nobody had died yet. And, maybe it could have been an opportunity for people to tone things down. Maybe the Israelis could have, rather than keep ratcheting up the tension, they could have said, hey, you know what, maybe we're pushing a little too far this time. Maybe we won't kick these 40 families out of their homes. But rather, they decided to respond by escalating themselves. Again, escalating the conflict by carrying out some airstrikes in Gaza that killed like 20 people. And so at that point, of course, Hamas is going to look weak if Israel kills 20 of their people, and then Hamas just takes it and says, oh, okay, we didn't want that result, so we're going to back down now. No. What did Hamas do? Of course, Hamas is going to fire back a bunch of rockets too and try and start killing Israelis. And so that's the cycle that we're in now. And the Israelis are now heavily bombing Gaza and marching their people in there. People who have no control over Hamas. I mean, it's not like they have elections in Gaza. I think Hamas was elected like once, maybe back in 2005 or something. And since then, I guess they just are considered, okay, they're in charge there. Just kind of like how Mahmoud Abbas is in charge, in the West Bank. He's the head of the PA. And how long has he been there? He's been the head of the PA since Arafat died. And if you happen to be unfortunate enough to have been born in Gaza or the West Bank, you just have to deal with these people, and you have to, face the repercussions of whatever, whatever sort of conflict they get into with the Israeli government. You have to bear the brunt of that. You're held as responsible as the leaders of Hamas, and not just the men, but the women and the children too. To borrow a line from Anakin Skywalker. I mean, it would seem to me that if the more that I watch this, because I see these things play out year after year, every few years there's a big dust-up like this. And Israel feels like, okay, well, we got to march into Gaza and start cracking some skulls to remind everybody who's boss. And then they leave and, the rubble, and then they, things go on for a few years. And then there's another flare-up and they come and do this again. It seemed to me that perhaps if the Israelis simply froze everything in place and said, you know what, we're not going to keep expanding. We're just going to hang on to the territory we have. The people who already are living in their houses, we're going to give them deeds to their properties. We're going to give them real property rights, and we're not going to just come in every couple of years and kick a few people out of their houses and replace their neighborhoods and fill them, with Jewish Israelis. Because it seems to me like that's the source of the conflict here. If you just stop displacing people, maybe Hamas and these other organizations, who again are, they're nobody who, if I lived over there, I would, if I lived under them, I wouldn't like them. Okay, if I was one of these, if I was a kid who grew up in Gaza, I don't think I'd be a fan of Hamas. Just like I'm not a fan of Hamas now. But Hamas would have much less of a leg to stand on, as far as, firing off rockets into Israel, if the Israelis were not, were not bad actors themselves. In other words, perhaps, people like Hamas would not have any support amongst the Palestinians if the Israelis were people who you could deal with reasonably. Perhaps the folks at Hamas would be viewed more by the Palestinians like they're viewed by a lot of people in the West, in that, as obstacles to peace. And maybe if Hamas tried to do something like this, under those circumstances, the ordinary people would rise up and reject them and say, "What are you doing, you fools? You're inciting the Israelis to come attack us." But at this point, the ordinary people in the West Bank and Gaza see that if they just sit by and do nothing, the Israelis are going to walk all over them. And so they seem to be, a lot of them are willing to support anyone who stands up and fights for them, even if they know that they will lose. Because what's the old saying? I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. It's a very basic human instinct, and it's one that that only gets stronger as people lose comfort in life. As your life becomes less comfortable, as you become poorer, you have less and less luxuries in your life to hang on to, and your dignity becomes much more important. And so since the U.S. has decided to veto another UN Security Council resolution condemning this action, I think that I should join in and at least condemn it myself. Because nothing good is going to come from this. The Israelis know what they're doing. They're not minimizing, security threats. They're making the situation worse. They're making it so that there will be more threats to them in the future. All they do every time that they bomb Gaza, or send in troops and kill a bunch of people, is they create a new generation of people who are completely radicalized against the Israeli government, and see no way of reasoning with them for again, for good reason. Because if your parents, if you're orphaned, if you're one of the kids who are going to be orphaned by this round of fighting, if you grow up without your mom or dad or both, God forbid, are you going to think to yourself, gee, if only, we're just, we need to make peace with Israel? No, you're going to think either I want revenge, or these people are savages, they killed my mom and dad, and they're going to come and kill me next if I let them. But of course, you have the same effect on the Israeli side. Every time that, the Gazans, that Hamas in Gaza shoots rockets over into Israel and that kills somebody, well, that radicalizes a bunch of Jewish people against them and says, and that's why you end up with lynch mobs like you saw, I think it was last night. There was a Jewish lynch mob that pulled an Arab guy out of his car and beat him. We don't know how serious his injuries are. That's not really being reported, but the guy was beaten on live TV pretty savagely. And the sad fact is that these sectarian hatreds are rooted in reality. They are they're founded upon very real events. And the only way that you could have any chance of ending this cycle of violence is by getting at the root of the problem, which is, of course, the lack of property rights for these non-Israeli citizen Arabs who happen to live on land that is controlled by the Israeli government. But, as I talked about the other day, one, they can't give these they can't give them property rights because the goal of the Israeli government is, pretty much to push these people out. It's just that they know that they can't do it all at once. They can only do it a little bit at a time, which is what they do. I mean, this latest dust-up is over 40 families. That's a very small number of people. But that's the pace at which the Israeli government kind of has to move, because they understand that they can't do, they can't do full-on ethnic cleansing, sort of 1990s Yugoslavia style, or even 1948, Israeli al-Nakba style. And so they have to kind of keep these folks in limbo. They're sort of awaiting expulsion. That's but I mean, I guess what I mean to say is that it just really sucks, man. There's nothing good that's going to come from this. People can get mad and talk about this and and condemn it all they want. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what anybody in America thinks. This stuff is going to keep going on. And again, at this point, you can't. Don't mistake my recognition of the fact that the Palestinians are definitely the underdog in this fight for me trying to sort of paint a good and evil narrative here, with the Palestinians as the good guys and the Israelis as the evil bad guys. The reason why I put more of an emphasis on again in the current in modern times, why I put more of an emphasis and sort of more blame on the part of the Israelis is because they are the ones who have the most power, and they have the power to inflict a lot more pain onto the Arabs than the Arabs have power to inflict pain onto them. But if the roles were reversed, I have no doubt that if the Arabs had the upper hand in terms of military power, that they would be causing just as much pain for the Israelis as the Israelis are causing for them. Because I would imagine, from the Palestinian perspective, if you look at the history of Israeli Israeli settlement in, or let me put it this way, and in using historical terms, Jewish settlement in Palestine from the late 19th through the 20th century. A lot of that, I would think, from a Palestinian's perspective, would be considered illegitimate and illegal. Because, as I discussed before, the Israelis were purchasing, land deeds from absentee landlords, and that was the justification which the Israelis used to try and evict, the Arabs off of these lands back in those days. And so, because sort of the foundation of the Jewish of all Jewish of the Jewish community in this part of the world, is on sort of shaky ground, legally speaking. I would imagine that you could make a pretty good, compelling case, especially if you're in power, from a Palestinian perspective, that sort of all Jewish property in Palestine/Israel, whatever you want to call it, are ill-gotten gains and therefore illegitimate. If I was, an attorney who worked for, let's say, there's some big conflict, and the Palestinians finally win, and now the Palestinians are the ones who are occupying Israel instead of the Israelis occupying the Palestinian lands. If they brought me in as sort of their attorney to try and justify ethnic cleansing of Jews out of that land, I could make a legal case for it. And so, given that, that makes me, that's sort of my basis here for why I'm not going to just jump on the Palestinian bandwagon and say, okay, these guys are angels, because I have to keep sort of that hypothetical alive. But outside the realm of the hypothetical, in reality, it is definitely the Israelis who are, as we speak, committing horrible atrocities against the civilian population. And it is the Israelis who would like Arabs to be physically removed from the Holy Land. Or at least they would like the Arabs to be, a small enough minority to where, Israel retains its character as a Jewish state. So that's all I have to say on that matter. It's bad. Wish it wasn't happening, but it's happening. So I'll end it off there.